We have 2 items under superintendent's report, and one that we've certainly been looking forward to, the high school schedule implementation update. Dr. Trice, Dr. Bales, I assume this is yours.
Yes. Good evening, Chair Griffin, members of the board, Superintendent Hamlet, Cabinet, and certainly members of the Chapel Hill Carrboro community. Tonight, we'll be sharing, as Dr. Griffin mentioned, an update on the implementation of our new high school schedule. As you can imagine, there are many layers to the work that we're doing, and we're excited to share a few items that were brought up during our assessment last year and give the board and our community an update on where we are with those. Specifically, as you can kind of see on the screen, professional development was a very important aspect of our assessment, certainly brought up by our teachers. Pacing, guide adjustments, switching from a 7-period day to a block schedule, scheduling questions and decision points, the timelines for those. It was very important for us last school year and also the beginning of this school year to continue to engage our teachers, visit schools, make sure there's an opportunity for voice in how this rolls out, and we'll talk a little bit about that. Of course, implementation risks. The board and our community will remember that our assessment, the basis of our assessment was partly identifying risks that would impact implementation, and we've continued to look at and scan our environment for risks, so we want to share a few of those with the board and our community, and also roll out our implementation dashboard. Dr. Bales is going to walk us through the first 4 bullet points, and I'll close this out with the last 2, and then we'll be happy to answer questions from the board. So, Dr. Bales.
Good evening. So we want to dive into a couple of different areas here. So we have our professional development overview, in which, there's a multiple different prongs that we've been kind of attacking this at. Getting a lot of feedback from our teachers over the past few months, in addition to last year. The want for professional development ranges from like, I got this, I've done this for years before I came to Chapel Hill, to I'll take as much as I can possibly get. So knowing that too, we want to make sure that we're not overwhelming teachers with professional development that they may not need. But we also want to make sure that we're giving that solid basis that we're able to really work with them with. So we broke it down into our in-person PD, some asynchronous PD, and just some dedicated PLC time. So looking at that in-person PD, my department has been working on rotating PDs, in which we go into schools once a month and provide different professional development opportunities. The other piece that we were also told is when we start school, we'd really like to just focus on the beginning of the school year. So we haven't started that work yet. We planned it in terms of knowing what we're doing starting in November on out, but trying to make sure that we allow teachers to dive into this school year and not necessarily have to go through the PD right away. A lot of that revolves around vocabulary work that we're already doing this year, but kind of transitioning that to what does that look like on the 4x4 schedule, kind of going into some of those essentials, and then really going into what can we actually do during this longer period of time, but still be able to plan throughout the year what that would look like in a shorter amount of months that you're actually in class. So looking at Socratic seminars, elevation work, which is some work that allows us to look really deeply at our ML data and figure out how do we actually use that data to create small groups. And then also looking at flex interventions, and then some of our tier 2 work and AVID interventions, and core work that we'll be doing there. Our asynchronous work is really trying to give us an opportunity to give teachers time during their planning periods, other times, and it's allowing them to kind of go in and decide, I really want to focus on this and I want to focus on that, but maybe not so much, the baseline information. So it's online, it's self-paced, professional development through Branching Minds. We have a partnership with them. I also want to be very clear that this is not, $1 million expense. Each one of the courses that we have costs $1 per teacher. So it's, very cost effective. We've been working with them to make sure that this is not a barrier when it comes to that. But With that, we kind of wanted to lay down the foundational work. So we have the foundations of MTSS and block scheduling, and then planning tiered interventions within a block schedule is kind of like that baseline. And then after that is really kind of a choose your adventure, where we get to decide, or our teachers get to decide, counselors get to decide, administrators get to decide, what do I want to focus on? There's a couple of courses in that are specific to counselors. There's some in there that's specific to administrators. It gives them the opportunity to go through and kind of decide, this is the pathway that I want to follow. Each of these courses ranges anywhere from about an hour to 4 hours. We've had a couple people that have already started to work on them a little bit. They've worked on them during their PLC times. Some of them actually worked on them together to kind of have that conversation in their PLC, which has been beneficial. But we anticipate that the full rollout of this will probably hit more November, December, January time, so that teachers have the opportunity to get in there, but then also have a self-paced time to be able to do that. I would say the piece that our teachers have asked for the most is just making sure they have dedicated time to be able to talk within their PLC. So we've talked with principals to make sure that that time is protected, especially as we move into the second half of the year, second quarter and on out. That they just want time to say, okay, looking at what we've done so far, what would this look like on a block schedule next year? How is it going to impact our pacing? I don't necessarily need to do 2 warm-ups in a day. Now I only have to do 1 because I've got them during a different amount of time. I will tell you this work has already started with many of our PLCs when we've been able to jump in and have conversations during PLCs. Like if we show up 5 minutes into it, they're already talking about it. So we just want to make sure that we dedicate that time moving forward as well. Pacing guide adjustments. So as we shared earlier, one of our goals is really to make sure that we update all of our pacing guides, hopefully by the end of November. We did a lot of this work over the summer, but some of those courses weren't necessarily able to progress as far as we would have liked, just due to the fact of not having teachers available during the summer to help work with some of that. We don't want to necessarily just rewrite the entire curriculum without having teachers involved in that process. So we are continuing to do that, knowing that some courses may have the first quarter done by the end of November, but really trying to make sure that by Thanksgiving, for the most part, those courses are revised and teachers have an ability to go in and see what the differences and changes may be. I would say the biggest question that we've had is really looking at our 4x4 or scheduling questions and decision points. So we've created a 4x4 committee. So this is a cross-representative group of every school, department. So we've got CT representation, arts, visual arts, performing arts, exceptional children. Every single department that we have across our division is going to be part of this meeting, 2 meetings that we have actually next Thursday, and then following again in November. So within that group, we're really trying to make sure that we're determining some alignment. We don't really want one school doing, here's an AB, here's another school doing a 4x4 block. We want to make sure that the alignment's happening, so the classes aren't necessarily looking and feeling different at the schools as well. Now within that, we've got to figure out, looking at data. So we've already started to pull some of our AP results to look at which classes, naturally should be partnered with each other, which classes might need to be partnered with another course, because we have some of our AP courses where 30% of the kids get a 4 or 5 and 70% get a 1, 2, or 3. Like looking at that data shows us that we might need to partner that with something else to make sure that we're getting the results that we want for that course. So not just looking at the AP piece, looking at our AVID, how do we make sure that we align that effectively? That's been a conversation. We really want to make sure that we have those conversations with our teachers so that we can look at what are the different options that we possibly have. And then kind of going back to what Dr. Trice had shared as well, looking at the risks that we had and making sure that we're trying to mitigate them the best we possibly can. So we'll be doing that, like I said, in October and November. Also understanding that, when we do that, we can have all of the greatest ideas in the world. A master schedule is incredibly difficult, especially at a high school level, once you add in all of the different idiosyncrasies. So in all honesty, when we go back to our decision point back in May and June of last year, one of the reasons that we moved forward with saying that 4x4 was like the basis and the piece that we're really focusing on is because if we went through and said, okay, we're going to do half of this and a quarter of this and a quarter of this, in reality, that's probably not going to be able to happen. So we've made sure that we have counselors from each of the schools, administrators from each of the schools who've been part of that master schedule process in that meeting as well, to be able to say, okay, if we did all of this, could we actually make this happen? So we'll be looking at that. And then lastly for this, we're partnering with ALP, which is Advanced Learning Partners, in a free partnership where they are creating kind of like best practices in Flex across the country. They're going to create a guidebook, and then they are going to actually do coaching with our principals and their leadership teams in November and December, where they're going to come in for a half day in each of the individual schools, share the guidebook, but then also be able to talk through what does this look like in your school now, and what do you want it to look like next year. So again, I feel like I've been in school so much talking with teachers about this that I should be on the Christmas cards. But that's, for me, that's one thing. I want to make sure that we're getting as much information from our teachers as naturally possible. And some people I see all the time, some people I'll see once here, once there, but really trying to continue to gather that input. I think for the most part, like our teachers, know what the decision is, but they just want to know, like, okay, what does that look like for me next year? Same thing with our parents. So I think a lot of this is really going to be having that one-on-one conversation once those decisions are made. Okay, what does this actually look like for you next year? So I've already went into some of our teachers' classes or during their planning times and actually talked through what does this look like for you. We've also, in part of that feedback gathering sessions, we worked with our professional development team. They went in as well just to figure out, okay, what are some different options that we can offer up for teachers that we may not have thought of already. So one of the things that we're looking at is getting some teacher panels of teachers either that have taught on a block schedule before or teachers from other districts to come in and just have here's an honest, open conversation of what does it look and feel like. And then lastly here, engaging in discussions with Durham Tech and counselors, and you'll see later on our implementation dashboard that some of those are already scheduled where you can actually pop on a Zoom at night, have a one-on-one conversation with our liaison from Durham Tech to talk about what possibilities would look like for your child. That's something that we continually do all the time anyway with our counselors, but our counselors are available, our administrators are available to really have that conversation about your students' pathways and 3 to 4 year planning. I'm going to hand it back over to Dr. Trice.
So, as I mentioned in the beginning, continuing to identify risks is something that's very important to this work because we want to implement the new high school schedule as seamless as possible. But there are risks that have emerged since the board made the decision to approve the new high school schedule. And you see a couple on the screen, but I want to let you know that, we have some hot off the press risk that I'd like to also kind of bring up. We didn't have time to kind of go back in and edit the slide deck, but I'll speak to it. So in 2017, the North General Assembly directed the North Carolina Department of Public Instruction to adopt a new student information system called Infinite Campus. This system will replace what we all know and love, PowerSchool, right? And so last year, in the November-December timeframe, DPI began to communicate with districts that they would implement the new student information system. Districts had the opportunity to choose to be in cohort 1 or cohort 2, kind of leaning on our past experience implementing PowerSchool. Our district chose to be a part of cohort 2, of course, to let cohort 1 work out all the kinks. And I do want to report to the board that there have been, in fact, kinks with the cohort 1 implementation. I've been in conversation with a number of my colleagues in our region and across the state, and even some of our state meetings where we identified some of those risks. So for those community members who may not know, a student information system is kind of where we house grades. It's where we house attendance. It helps schools build out their master schedule. And of course, moving to a new system is a risk, right? And so when Dr. Hamlet and I began to get word that there were some issues with the rollout in cohort 1, we wanted to get a better understanding of that. And so we've done a lot of that work. Just this past Monday, we were at DPI with the senior leadership responsible for rolling out the new student information system. We were able to raise all of the concerns that we had heard, from our partner districts, but also in some of our state level meetings. And we feel pretty comfortable that, there was a full explanation in terms of why those issues came about. Since that time as well, the cohort 2 work has started. And so over the past couple weeks, our student information team has spent 8 days learning about the new platform from DPI. And again, based on what we're hearing from our team, we feel comfortable with the rollout, but we wanted to be upfront with our board about the transition to Infinite Campus. I will mention, I'm not a tech person, but I think I know enough to be dangerous. And so PowerSchool is built around individual students. So the information around our students, whether we're talking about our address, grades, attendance, that type of thing. The move to Infinite Campus, the information is really centered around homes as opposed to the kids. So it's centered around an address. So a family might have multiple students in their home. They go to different schools, but the central organizing principle of Infinite Campus is the home, not necessarily the student. So for instance, if I want to communicate with all of my families without sending 3 emails to the Trice household, it should be better for that type of thing. The reason I share that with the board is because there's not an easy export from PowerSchool and import into Infinite Campus. We have to export from PowerSchool, rearrange our data to be centered around homes, and then import it into Infinite Campus. Our tech people are up on that, and they feel pretty comfortable that we'll be able to do it. We've also started to play around with a little of that and have tons of help with that. But again, wanted to be upfront about the risk. You also see the reduction in force. Certainly our community understands what we've been going through as a district. We've been, as an administration, looking at that and its impact perhaps on implementation of our high school schedule. As an example, high school counselors are, except for the lead counselor, have gone to 10-month contracts. And as we kind of walk this path in terms of implementing our timeline and course selection, we're looking at the impact of what that might be. We haven't kind of come across any hiccups or hurdles that we can anticipate. Certainly, we've had to kind of move up a lot of the work that we need to do to make sure that, for instance, students can select courses, get their schedules, communicate with families. And you can see some of that in our dashboard as well. So, again, as we update the board, we just want to be sure that we come back to these risks or any others that emerge as we walk this path. The risk that I was not able to update on our slide is related to a conversation that the guiding committee talked a lot about, as well as some in our community, to be perfectly honest, and that is balancing the number of days between first semester and second semester. You'll remember in block schedule, there are more instructional days in the first semester than second semester. Districts in North Carolina and across the country deal with that imbalance by having review days first semester and second semester, particularly for students enrolled in AP courses. And that's certainly something we explored, but we also shared with the guiding committee and the teachers that we've been engaged with that we would do a good faith effort in exploring other options that we could look at as well. I'll ask Dr. Hamlet if that's okay, if you could speak to, the other option we might explore and maybe get some feedback from the board at the end of the presentation.
Sure, and we can get through the rest of the presentation.
Yeah.
But one thing that I would like for the board to consider and think about, now, this would be another major shift, but we could potentially petition the state for a waiver and think about starting school 2 weeks earlier for high school students. And then now we could, we all know the whole calendar law conversation, right? But we want to make sure that we have some clear guidance from the board. If you think that the community can stomach that while we make this transition, but to Dr. Trice's point, we did tell our teachers and staff that we would make a good faith effort to go above and beyond the, review sessions and those things that many of our colleagues across the state and the country have done for years. So we haven't explored that option yet, but just want the board to think about what that would look like and if that's something you want us to gather more information about and potentially pursue. I do think it would require a waiver from the state. And essentially, our high school students would start school 2 weeks earlier and end the school year 2 weeks earlier, with our elementary and middle school students staying on our typical calendar or schedule. That's our initial thinking, but just wanted to throw that out there. If that's something you guys want us to do some more exploration around, we're certainly happy to do that. But I'll let Dr. Trice continue, and then we can talk more about that this evening.
Thank you, Dr. Hamlin. And members in our community may also remember, basically what this is also saying is that we would end first semester before the winter holiday break and start the second semester after the return. So what Dr. Hamlet just mentioned is the result of all of that. So I think as part of any major decision in our district, transparency and accountability is important, certainly around the transition to the new high school schedule. And so we've introduced an implementation dashboard, which is also linked in our abstract. As I mentioned at the opening of my comments, there are a lot of layers to the work of transitioning to the new schedule. And as you can imagine, a lot of different documents that we're kind of working in. But the dashboard is the administration's best attempt to consolidate the information that we also have in a lot of other documents and make it consumable to our students, parents, staff, who can also follow along with where the administration is, the resources that we're kind of looking at, the timelines, decision points. And currently, I won't read through all of them, but you can kind of see the focus areas of the implementation dashboard at this time. Just like other dashboards that we have, for instance, with the Curriculum and Instruction Management Plan, this is a live document, and so it updates as we update the work that we're doing. And so I want to be clear that there may be other focus areas that are added. I know Dr. Hamlin and I talked recently about like a communications plan where it's clear this is where the decision areas where people can expect to get communications. And but it's a good tool that I think kind of outlines a lot of kind of what we're focused on right now, some of which Dr. Bales shared. Just very quickly, it's linked off of our main website. So if our community members go to the academics tab at the top, click on middle and high school, you'll see it on the left side in the drop-down implementation dashboard. I want to also communicate that whether we're talking about board members or staff members or community members, when you read through the dashboard, sometimes it can get heavy on the education lingo. My contact information and Dr. Bales' contact information is at the top, and we're always available to kind of help walk people through it or answer questions. if those come up. So I just wanted to point that out. But that's what we have right now, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that board members may have.
Thank you, Dr. Trice and Dr. Bales. Risa, go ahead.
Thank you both. Thank you for the update. I think this is really helpful. The risks, I always think, what can we do to minimize or mitigate as many risks as we can? And understanding that the high school counselors were impacted, I know for me, understanding we've got this infinite campus thing happening at the same time, I'd be interested to hear if the staff think that we might need to do something where we change the high school counselor's schedule or contract to be in support of that. I know I would be interested in that because I do want this to be successful. And so obviously, we did these changes as a board.
Right.
And so if the administration says, you know what, we probably need all hands on deck to make it successful.
So right now, we're still in like the information gathering stage. One of the things we have talked about with our school counselors and our high school leaders is that just because the contracts have been reduced to 10 months does not mean that everybody has to take the month of July off.
Right.
So we have talked about doing some creative things like staggering their time on their contract. So some people might take a week or two in the middle of the year. And that also will depend on who the counselor is at each high school that works with the master schedule the closest. Now, they all have, a hand in that, but there's certainly a lead counselor and then other employees that are part of the counseling team. So right now, that's what the plan is, to kind of shift the schedule for our school counselors so that everyone is not off at the same time over the summer.
Okay. And then I guess my second comment question, it's more to Eva. I looked at you about the waiver. I mean, I'm curious, would this create something similar to like some of the exceptions that we see with year-round school potentially? I see there's other districts that have different calendars within their district, so they're not all on this schedule. Is that?
All your schools do not have to be on the same calendar. Waivers are reserved for weather-related issues,
Okay.
so I would be surprised if that was available. There are also exceptions for early colleges, or as you pointed out, for year-round schools, but the definition of year-round school has been narrowed to the point where you have to have you really have to have the students there. You have to have at least like a group of students in school at all times, right? So either you have to have 4 groups that are rotating like these multi-track, or you have 4 quarters that are 12 months and students can take 1 quarter off, but you have to have 4. So it's very narrow.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So it is at this time pretty restrictive.
Okay. But you don't know of any districts that might be doing something similar-ish?
I mean, similar in what way?
Starting 2 weeks earlier, the break, and then ending 2 weeks earlier.
There are districts that have adopted alternative calendars,
Okay.
not within the bounds of the calendar law.
Okay.
Is this a situation where an attorney can't advise someone to break the law? Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to speak to what you were just saying, Riza. I met some school board members from another district, and I won't say what the district is, just so that it wouldn't put them out in a different situation. But they are following the calendar law to the point where it says where the students aren't supposed to return back by the certain date. So they brought the teachers and staff back earlier, but not students. So they're able to start in that way. And they added 6 minutes to their day so that they make sure that they are satisfying the state requirement based on days and minutes so that they don't get harassed. So maybe that could be something to be looked at in terms of our high schools, just offering that up. They said they love it and the tourist industry loves it and all that good stuff because they still have the students until the end of the summer. I'm just saying.
And again, we just are trying to think and act differently. So we have not, explored what that would look like further. And just wanted to kind of hear from the board. We do have, and this was a big part of the discussion as you all were grappling with the high school block implementation. We do have students who take classes through Durham Tech who start school and start those classes 2 weeks earlier. So, we were just trying to think how could we potentially mitigate the concern and the risk that many of our community members, students, parents, and staff alike shared about the imbalance in the number of instructional days between semester 1 and 2.
And I think to Dr. Hamlet's point, when districts typically petition for changes in the calendar law, like that 2 weeks, it's really so that we can align with the community college system calendar for students who are enrolled in those college and career promise courses.
I think for me, George, I'm sorry, I came back. I think I would be interested in it. I know we've been advocating for it. I can't speak for whoever we have to petition for this, but I think saying things like, this is what we're trying to do, right? We see a trend. This is the number of students who we have taking these classes. Right now we've got something very interesting happening where the kids are already taking the classes and we're having growing numbers of interest in support of our community college system for our kiddos to do this in high school. And I'm hoping maybe it might be a compelling and thought-provoking thing for whoever is going to have to hear our petition. Because I think, again, it's about the kids. I get it, the calendar laws for other reasons for adults, but we're here for kids. And so if that's going to help the kids, I would say, let's ask, let's try.
And we also talked about many of the things, if not all of the things that Eva mentioned in our guiding committee. But I think, and I don't want to speak, but I think the overall sentiment was, we understand that, but also let's try to do something beyond just, what districts are typically doing in terms of, support courses and opportunities. Perhaps we can get it changed. And Dr. Bales and I, and speaking with Dr. Hammer, we felt like we at least owe it to our teachers in the guiding committee to pursue that and be told no and the reasons why, as opposed to, not even pursuing it, if that makes sense.
And I think we have data. We're seeing an uptick in kids taking classes through Durham Tech. It's a pathway we encourage our kids to explore. We're seeing an increase in kids and our graduates going to Durham Tech as well. So I think we wouldn't be doing them justice if we didn't try, we didn't ask.
So thank you very much. This is really helpful. I have a couple of questions. One about stakeholder engagement and I guess specifically teachers. So just thinking back to the conversations we've had over 4 meetings, 4.5. And it felt like the pain points. I'm interested in how the various folks who were raising, I feel like the biggest objections came from some music folks, math, world languages, various AP classes.
Arts, yeah.
Arts, yeah. And so I guess I'm just anecdotally, how's that going? And yeah.
Right. I'll let Dr. Bell speak to some of the engagement that we've been doing, but I also want to speak to, so there can seem like there's a lack of decision points by this date we know what the skinnies are or what the year-long courses are. And so Dr. Bells and I have been very careful not to kind of set arbitrary decision dates for the reasons that I think you're mentioning. So since school started, and even before when the board made the decision in June of last year, we were kind of engaging groups of teachers, and we've continued to do that, whether it's arts, world language, and whatnot, even this year. The first level of work that we were doing is to make sure that, you know, those teacher groups understood kind of what the decision was, kind of we're looking at a 4x4, not some alternative. And so there was a one-pager, I think it's linked in our dashboard, that we wanted to socialize at each one of our schools, not just by sending an email, but again, being there in person, talking through the document. You know, we're not here to adjudicate whether we're doing it or not, but here's kind of the starting point. And so that's what we've done the first part of the year. And I don't know, Dr. Bells, if you want to speak to, you know, some of the more direct engagement that we've had with some of the, you know, I like the way you put the pain points, and how we were intentional about including not only those subject areas, but some of the teachers who brought up those pain points on our committee that Dr. Bells spoke to. So.
Yeah, I think Dr. Trice kind of stole my thunder with that. But yeah, I mean, we were very purposeful. Principals selected, you know, which, you know, they had a list of like, here's all of the different subjects. We even had a couple extra like bonus spots, if you want to call it, for AP classes, just so we made sure that we had that representation on there. But we were very purposeful. Like, you know, we want to make sure people that are most concerned with certain issues, like those are the people that you should have on the committee. You know, I want them to be part of the conversation, to understand, you know, what can work, what can't work, and to be able to bring that information back to their schools as well. So I think that's important, you know, and, you know, in all honesty, like I've had individual conversations with many teachers, just, you know, what could this look like? I think that's where we're at right now too, is what is this really going to look like for me? I mean, I've had many teachers, we have course proposals, so in the next couple board meetings, we'll have course proposals come forward for you all to look at, and we've got some people that, you know, want to propose courses that just says, well, they'll just take my course, you know, 8 times over their high school career. And that may happen for some students, but that's not going to happen for everyone. So we also don't want to pigeonhole students to say like, oh, we're having 8 classes, but you really only have 4 because we're going to make them all year long and partner with something else. We want to make sure our students also have some of that choice. So I think that'll be a lot of our conversation next Thursday and in November. Okay, we could do that, and if we did that, what's the ripple effect?
You all may have, I'm sorry, I just jumped in. You all may have shared this already, but can you share a little bit about over the summer where there were teachers who gathered, who had some of the major concerns, who asked to meet together as a group without, you know, Lincoln Center staff, which we appreciated because they were problem solving and working through some proposals or things that they wanted to be considered as this begins to play out. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, those were in those work days and probably that first week after school was out. Every school had like a, hey, come in, you know, let's have a conversation. You know, we know what the decision is. You know, what do we want to really make sure that we see? And there were a couple of things weren't even necessarily like block related. You know, it turned out, you know, they really were focused on, okay, well, can you get the grading policy changed? Can you know, make sure the kids don't have cell phones? So, like, we've done some of those things because those were the things first. Like, let's get the things out of the way that may impact our ability to do this, so we can get to the heavy work. But I would say each school met for at least an hour. Some schools met multiple times. Some of the people that were at one school went to another school just to hear some of the same conversations. But there was some grassroots conversations, and then, you know, they met with us, and, you know, we took a lot of that information to, you know, add to our risk and our conversations. Would have been great if we could have continued that conversation during the summer, but we also didn't want to leave people out just because, you know, they had a second job or they were traveling or that piece as well. So we really waited until the beginning of school year, and, you know, we've continued those conversations, but it gave us a great baseline of kind of where's the pulse of the teachers right at this point.
And I would also just add, I mean, to Dr. Hamlet's point, the appreciation around educators coming together, understanding that a decision is made, whether you agree with it or not, but how can we kind of work together to make the implementation as smooth as possible. They were, just remembering that meeting, I mean, so they were unapologetic about, some of the things that they wanted to see. And, I think the balancing of like the semesters was one of those things. And I think we just have to make good on each of those as we kind of go down this path.
Board, yeah, Mike, go ahead. Oh, Barb, you got something?
Were we done with?
Go ahead.
No,
I
no,
do
no.
have more, but go ahead.
Okay, I didn't know if that was part of continuing that same. Okay, Dr. Bales, you talked about PLCs meeting and having, sort of like protected time to do that. I don't have a lot of experience with high school PLCs. Is there subject area across schools meeting time? Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, so, really, if you think of a high school teacher, they may teach one course, 2, 3. They may be part of 3 different PLCs. So we've asked principals, as we're moving forward, some of them just done it naturally so far, but we're asking, as we move forward, it may be, in lieu of a meeting that they may have, say, okay, instead of that, I'm going to give you time to actually meet after school or, during different planning periods. I know that when you create a master schedule, you try to, make sure that those classes have the same planning periods, but that doesn't happen with every single class that you may teach.
Right.
So, it varies. But, we wanted to make sure that, and I'll be honest, like a lot of people, there's a lot of great conversations that happen through Google Doc. Here's a question.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? What do you, and those Google Docs continue to just kind of, add and, move as we go along. But, we're asking principals as we move forward, make sure that we're protecting some of that time.
Right.
It may be like, okay, we're going to make sure that we don't pull any math teachers on Mondays. So that, during their planning periods, they can do this or after school.
Right.
I will say for high schools, it may be more before school, since we end a little bit later, but, making sure that we're providing that opportunity for them to meet.
Okay. I guess what I was thinking more was if we want, because one of our goals is to have more consistency across schools. So I wonder how much, like, in a certain subject area, that teacher from each school meets together to discuss the implementation. Does it make sense?
Yeah, and we'll do that on we have after school Wednesday professional development that we'll start to get more into that with. Right now it's been more of the curriculum development for some of those conversations, but it'll turn more into like, okay, here's Math 3, they'll all get together and have that conversation after school.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a question for our attorney. So in June, there were 29 out of 115 school districts not following the calendar. They all have something in common that we do not have, I think, just from looking at them. And I guess I'm just wondering, with maybe the possible exception of Winston-Salem, Forsyth, but they don't have, okay, so they all have something. They also have that thing in common. Okay. So, is this a trend? I mean, where is this sort of, like, what's school board association on this? Like, is there any movement? So there'll be more, or?
During the last session, I know there's been dozens of bills filed. They've not been permitted to come to the floor. I know that there's been a lot of advocacy, including by state legislators of both parties, but the Senate leadership thus far has held firm. So I think it is a continued push and something that the School Board Association will continue to push for. But there is essentially a single bottleneck.
Okay.
Yes.
So I, then just relatedly, I guess my own feeling is I really would love us to start earlier, but I do worry a little bit about high school students being on a different schedule from their younger siblings and the parent feelings about vacations and just.
I was going to say, at some point, we'll circle back to this high school schedule start time, but the board is circling us back every time. So we can certainly talk about it as well in the context. since we're doing that now, why don't we just get some clarity on that? And then I do have just a couple questions, but you asked us, do we want you to look into it, proceed further? Is the answer sort of yes, I'm sensing? Yeah.
Yes, to me.
We're getting a yes. I think to explore some possibilities would definitely be in order. I will tell you just personally, I've talked to a number of high school newspaper reporters, students, parents, and teachers. And every time I've said, as soon as possible, I'm going to ask the calendar committee to move us up 2 weeks. But I wasn't thinking right away. I was just thinking next iteration. Everybody just gets ecstatic. Like, that would be super to do that. So I don't take that as a scientific poll or anything, but I haven't had anybody say no, especially when you point out that winter break would end the semester at winter break. People are like, boy, that would be a big plus. So, you know.
So we'll gather more information, maybe come up with some, maybe like a framework for a potential waiver request, and then bring that back to the board for consideration before we officially seek a waiver. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, and, you know, like, I mean, I agree. I think Barb's question is one I would be asking is, you know, it might be a nice thing to do, but is it going to be so disruptive to families that it's just not worth pushing it for this year? And let's do it in a big picture for everybody in time, and just have a year to kind of go, we wish we could have done it, because that's a real, I think that's a real concern. That would, yeah. So go to fleshing that out as you check with people, if you would. Yeah. Okay?
Campus,
All right.
presentation.
You said you've got pacing guides adjusted already till,
A lot of them.
with a few more till November? That's pretty incredible.
Well, yeah, so I mean, as we shared with the board at the time,
Yeah.
we're kind of killing two birds with one stone in terms of the curriculum and instruction audit. This is work that
Yeah.
we had to do anyway, but
Yeah.
because of the transition, I mean, we have to do that
Okay.
in terms of making sure that they're adjusted for the block schedule.
Okay. Well, most of my questions were already asked by other board members, so that was one I just wanted to double check you had said that.
Yeah.
I thought that was quite remarkable.
Well, we didn't do a lot of that work. That was a lot of our teachers and our curriculum directors kind of really getting in a room and hashing it out.
Right.
Yeah, so hats off to them.
And I want to echo something Riza said, and that is that to the extent it's humanly possible, I do not want us to have a budget constraint turn out to be a problem. And I don't have an answer for that except a commitment as one board member to ask the superintendent to do whatever it takes to make sure we get this right. And that it's not a result of our budget decision that prevented something from happening that really needed to happen.
Yeah.
So if we can have that discussion, I don't want to belabor the point, but I think it's really critical. And that was it for me. Other board members, otherwise we'll ask them if they have additional comments. And
Well, I would like to.
Yeah.
I would like to say, I mean, kind of looking at all the documents and also the dashboard. I think it's important for me to say, I think we're on schedule. There's nothing that I see before us as a major hurdle in us implementing the work. That's easy for me to say because, you know, we're in the daily mix of it. But I do think it's important that our community hear that from me. And if anything changes, we're certainly committed to coming back before the board and sharing information if it does change.
okay, I guess not having any more questions. Good. Thank you very much for that update.
Thank you.
Thank you.